Today we're breaking down the best champions you can play for every single role in patch 13.4. And if you want to see the builds and runes and matchups and everything else you could ever think of for these champions, then check out Mobalytics by clicking the link in the description. Starting off with that top lane, and the first one we've got to talk about is GANGPLANK. The pirate seems to have been around for such a long time now, and he's not getting any weaker. In fact, he actually seems to be getting stronger with each patch instead. Ever since those big crit item changes hit the Rift, GANGPLANK is just a bit too strong. There's not many champions in the game that can be as threatening without even needing to worry about a mythic item. An Essence Reaver along with an Navori Quick Blades just makes those barrels seriously hurt. GANGPLANK is by no means an easy champion to play, but when his win rate is this high across this many ranks for this period of time, you realise that even the more average GANGPLANK players are still winning a ton of games. So whether you're pretty new to the champion, whether you're an absolute GANGPLANK barrel combo mastermind, or some kind of combination of the two, either way GANGPLANK is just in such a good position. So if you aren't playing him already, why not? Next up is OLAF, and he's yet another champion that's just been so strong for so long now. We thought the buffs to Grievous Wounds and the nerfs to some of his items might turn him down a notch, but in actual fact they didn't really do a thing. OLAF is still stomping that top lane game after game, his win rate is absurd, and he just rolls over so many other top laners. If you're a tank trying to shut him down with CC, that's not going to do anything against his ultimate. If you're a bruiser, OLAF still wins a lot of those lanes, especially pre-6 anyway. He has such a high amount of damage early game, and if he does kill you, he can just start diving you on repeat. The only issue with OLAF is he is a bit weaker when he gets put behind, but most champions are, and all it really needs for OLAF to get back into the game is one good pop-off fight with his ghost and his ultimate active, running at backlines and taking them down without too much counterplay. We definitely expect some OLAF nerfs to hit the Rift sometime soon, but if you are an OLAF main, keep abusing him while you still can. Our third top laner for you to play this patch is Camille. She's never really been weak so far this season, but there's just some champions that just completely overshadowed her. But with more and more of those difficult matchups getting nerfed, she's just getting better and better. We all know just how good a good Camille can be. She's got mobility, she's got crazy burst damage in the lane phase, she's got a really versatile kit, and her ultimate can pick off and isolate targets as soon as she wants to. So whether you're outplaying ganks and dives in the top lane or diving onto enemy AD carries and teamfights, Camille's ultimate and Camille's kit can be so good at outplaying enemies even against all of the odds. We're also going to add a one-trick pony pick for each of the roles in this video, and the one for the top lane just has to be Rengar. Rengar's having a whale of a time in the top and the jungle at the moment, but it's actually the top lane where he's having the most success. If you've already played against a good top lane Rengar pick recently, you'll realise just how oppressive it can be. It can sit in those lane brushes, jump on you, burst you down, jump back out again, outplay your jungler, outplay you, and yeah, it's pretty infuriating. But if you are good enough on Rengar to do this yourself, then you realise just how much fun it can be. So if you're stomping the enemy top and jungler at the same time, or just waiting for 6 and roaming around the map instead. If you know the combos, you know the mechanics, and you're good enough at Rengar, he's such a great pick to play in patch 13.4. Let's move into the jungle now, and our first pick just has to be EVELYNN. Now with the sheer amount of junglers that were nerfed in patch 13.4, EVELYNN wasn't one of them, which means she's now getting back to her best again. There were so many oppressive and super broken champions in the jungle, which is why EVELYNN did fall down a little bit recently, but with these getting nerfed, she is well and truly back. EVELYNN is a fairly unique jungler because she doesn't have the best kit when it comes to ganks and just general influence before level 6. But what she does do best is snowball games completely on her own and end up bursting down everyone and 1v9ing super easily. It's so hard to play against EVELYNN because you have to ward in a completely different manner than usual. You need to ward her camps, you need to buy control wards far more often than you would normally. And if you don't, you basically have to play around the threat that EVELYNN could always be there. If you don't know where she is on the map, then she could be in your lane, waiting to charm you, burst you down and start snowballing at a super fast pace. Our second jungler to play in patch 13.4 is actually JARVAN, and yes, despite getting nerfed, he's still one of the best junglers you can play. When JARVAN is viable, he's one of the most reliable junglers in the game. He can gank so often, so early, and shut out lanes so quickly. And if enemies don't have flashes or dashes, well, they're just going to get absolutely farmed, especially once he has his ultimate, because if they dodge his EQ, they can't dodge his R. Now whether you go for a bit more of a damage build or a bit more of a bruiser build with Gore Drinker, either way you're going to be super impactful on JARVAN this patch. You deal a surprising amount of burst damage, you have a good amount of durability, you can be really hard to shut down, and you can simply cause chaos in enemy backlines. One of the best things about JARVAN as well is that he's just so simple to pick up and learn. All you gotta do is know how to use his EQ combo, and that's pretty much about it. The rest of it is super self-explanatory. So if you haven't played him yet and you're looking for a new jungler to give a go, give JARVAN a try. Our third jungler to go for in patch 13.4 is actually going to have to be RAMMUS. His win rate is surprisingly high, and I don't think people quite realise just how strong he is. The jungle is super easy to clear these days. He can navigate and speed around the map super quickly with that Q, and we all know just how punishing Rammus's ganks can be due to the sheer amount of crowd control that he offers. Now, it is pretty easy to get ahead on Rammus just because of how strong your ganks are, but if you don't, still offer all of that crowd control, so you're always going to be useful. If you do get ahead though, enemy AD carries are simply going to one-shot themselves when they auto-attack you, and you can force them to auto-attack you with your taunt. So if they don't take cleanse or QSS, there's nothing they can do but sit there and watch themselves commit suicide. If that doesn't sound like fun, I don't know what is. Our one-trick pony pick for the jungle this patch is Lee Sin. And finally, Lee Sin has made his grand return. And right now, his win rate is super high, especially considering how low Lee Sin's win rate normally is. Now, we already know just how good Lee Sin can be when he's viable. He has mobility, he has damage, he has fantastic skirmishing power, he's got that kick for utility in teamfights, he can insect people, he can kick them away, he can peel. The list really does go on. So when Lee Sin's in a good spot, it is very difficult not to include him in these lists. Now, thankfully, Lee Sin is one of the most fun junglers in the game to play. So when he is at his best, it's a great time to play League of Legends. Let's move on to the mid lane now, and our first pick is Cassiopeia. Every single patch, Cassiopeia just gets better and better, and ever since those big changes to Rod of Ages and Seraph's Embrace, she's just been so strong. The amount of durability and tankiness she gains from these items is a bit absurd, especially when you also add the damage and sustain as well. Cassiopeia is terrifying to play against if she's been played by the right person. The kiting, the relentless DPS, the big ultimates in teamfights, there's so much she can do to influence and impact and win games. Cassiopeia is only really weak when she's heavily put behind and camped early game, but this just doesn't really happen that often these days. She's way too strong, way too early on, and she scales like an absolute monster. Now, I'm sure if you are a mid lane main, you're probably already banning or picking Cassiopeia already. But if you aren't doing either of these things, I definitely recommend learning how to play against it, because she's easily one of the best champions in the entire game, not just the mid lane. Our second mid lane pick is Annie, and yes, still no nerfs for Annie in patch 13.4 after those big buffs saw her rise straight into those S tiers. Annie is a really easy champion to pick up and learn. You farm with Q, you clear the waves with your W, you run around in circles with your E up, and wait for those glorious moments to land those big flash tibbers. Yes, Annie has so much to offer, with massive AoE damage, massive single target burst, and even if she does get a bit far behind, she still has the possibility to stun an entire team. But to be honest, getting behind doesn't really happen too often these days. The great thing about Annie as well is she works well with so many different champions and team comps, so there's never really a bad game to pick it. She offers amazing gank setup for a jungler, and if her jungler isn't playing around her, she can just roam around the map and gank other lanes instead. You all know who our third mid laner is going to be. Yes, it's AURELION Sol. Ever since that rework, he has been everywhere, with a massive ban rate and a very big pick rate to match. AURELION Sol's rework has just been absolutely chaotic since it hit the Rift, and now you really do feel like a godlike dragon soaring around the map and burning your enemies to death. He still doesn't have the most reliable early game in the world, but his mid to late game definitely makes up for it, with some crazy scaling, amazing AoE damage, and consistent DPS as well. AURELION Sol is just so much fun to play, and when you look at his stats and see how well he's performing, it's hard not to pick him. Finally, our one trick pony to play in the mid lane this week is actually going to have to be Zoe. Yes, Zoe is so much stronger than you might realise. She's actually having such a fantastic time in 13.4 so far, being amongst those big boys in the S tier. Zoe definitely takes a lot of practice to play consistently well though. She's got lots of things to think about with those combos, mechanics, and item actives and some of the spells usage as well. But if you can play her perfectly, you get a champion with tons of burst damage, crazy pick potential, and a good amount of mobility too. Let's move down to the bot lane now then and start off with those AD carries, and the first and best AD carry to play in patch 13.4 just has to be XAYAH. I cannot remember the last time that XAYAH was this popular with this amount of picks and bans, but when you look at her win rate, you look at her stats and her performance, you quickly understand why. XAYAH has a really consistent damage output these days. She has fantastic burst damage with those feathers too, she has incredible self peel with her ultimate, she has incredible synergy with certain supports that are also really strong like RAKAN, and she just doesn't really have too many bad matchups either. You easily have the opportunity and ability to stomp in those early 2v2s, but you also have all of the fantastic tools to kite and outplay your enemies when it comes to those teamfights. XAYAH is definitely one of the hardest AD carries in the game to beat right now, so if you aren't playing her already, why not? The second AD carry to talk about today is Twitch, and this guy's been having a great season as well. Twitch has been played all over the map recently, a lot of people spamming AP Twitch mid or AP Twitch support, but actually he's still super consistent in the AD carry position. Whether you build him AD or AP is completely up to you, but either way he brings a crazy amount of damage, good kiting, and a very unpredictable playstyle to the Rift as well, with of course his stealth mechanic. Twitch is really one of the only AD carries in the game that can pull off so many consistent roams. Every single time you reset, every single time you walk into a brush, enemies have to be careful of you, because you can stealth into their lane, get the jump on them, and get a good amount of gold too. Now whether you do play aggressively, whether you roam, whether you snowball, it doesn't really matter, because once team fights come around, you can kite, you can deal so much AoE damage with that ultimate. And if you're good enough, you got the mechanics, you got the positioning, you're going to win a lot of games on the rat. Our third AD carry pick of the patch this patch is Kai'Sa. Yes, one of the most popular AD carries in the game, and has been for a while. Kai'Sa just has everything that you want from an AD carry. She's got wave glitch, she's got burst damage, she's got great damage against tanks, she's got kiting, she's got scaling, she's got self peel with that ultimate, and the list really does go on. She still doesn't have the strongest lane phase in the world, which is offset slightly by the fact she has great synergies with certain supports, and she can also be picked with pretty much any support. But as soon as you get a few abilities evolved, as soon as you get a few items and get those power spikes rolling, you can outplay all sorts of enemies, you can kite to your heart's content, and you can carry by putting your teammates on your back. Kai'Sa is definitely one of those AD carries that feels so rewarding to play well. And once you've got the mechanics down and you know how to position in team fights, you know how to kite around and do your job, you're going to feel like a complete badass. Now if you do want to play something a bit different, our one-trick pony pick for the bot lane this week is KARTHUS. KARTHUS has been strong in the AD carry position all season, and probably most of last season too, but he's still just not played enough. AP KARTHUS in that bot lane has a crazy amount of early game damage, but his scaling is really what makes him so damn hard to beat. Now whether you do get ahead by landing consistent Qs in the early game, or whether you just sit back, farm up and press R, either way he's super easy to be impactful on, he scales like a weapon, and if you do get to those late game team fights, even if you die, it doesn't matter. Press R and GG well played. Finally, let's take a look at those supports now, and the best support you can play this patch is going to have to be Rakan. Now this is likely also due to the fact that XAYAH is so strong too, but even on his own, Rakan is having the best time we've seen him have for such a long time. He has so much to offer in the form of his utility, his shielding, his damage, his mobility, and everything else he brings to the table. And when you dive into a team fight, you lock them all down with your W, you press your ultimate, and dash back out to safety at the same time, you feel unstoppable. Rakan can be picked with pretty much any AD carry, and he works so well into so many different team comps too. And as long as you are good enough to pull him off, he's a great choice to go for in patch 13.4. Our next pick for the support role is BLITZCRANK, and with so many of his difficult matchups nerfed, he's just getting better and better. BLITZCRANK has such a good ability to stomp and snowball that lane phase by landing hooks, by running up and using his E, and basically turning those into kills every single time. And if it isn't working out in that lane, he can just roam around the map and gank other lanes instead, assist his jungler, and snowball the rest of the map super quickly. Now obviously we all know just how impactful one good BLITZCRANK hook can be, whether it's in a late game team fight just before Baron, or whether it's in the early game on a level 1 invade. But it isn't just those hooks which makes him so strong. He's generally pretty tanky, he's got good movement speed to get in range to land those knockups, and his ultimate is super underrespected and underappreciated as well. I mean, it's a massive AoE silence, it's instant cast, which instantly evaporates all shields. There's definitely more that meets the eye than BLITZCRANK. He's much better than people realize, and he's a lot less one-dimensional. So if you do have the hands of God and can land those hooks every single time, there's no point playing anyone else. Speaking of those hooks, our third support to play this patch is THRESH. The changes he received in 13.4 were massive, and they've definitely brought him back to life. He deals a lot more damage now, which means he's a lot more threatening in lane alongside his CC he already provided. And yes, he still brings all of that beautiful CC and utility that he's always had. With so many of his difficult matchups being nerfed, like those pokey mages and those super strong enchanters, he's now back to his best. Which me personally, I'm definitely not complaining about, because THRESH has always been one of the most fun supports to play in my opinion. There's so many different satisfying things you can pull off, from landing that massive hook at the right time to lanterning out your AD carry to safety in a clutch moment. Just like BLITZCRANK, THRESH has the ability to roam around the map and cause chaos in other lanes as well. But generally, setting up lantern ganks, setting up ganks for his jungler, fighting in those 2v2s is where he really shines. Finally, we have our one-trick pony pick in that support role, and it has to be Pyke. The third hooking champion on this list shows just how good these guys are right now. And if you're good enough, Pyke is easily up there with some of the best champions in this role. He does take a bit more practice than some of the other supports, but his skill ceiling is incredibly high, and the amount of combos, mechanics and tricks you can pull off on Pyke when you get good enough is pretty insane. From something as simple as flash E-ing onto the enemy AD carry in the lane phase, to landing a massive chain collection of ultimates in that big clutch team fight. If you can play him well enough, he's a great pick to play right now. And that's going to bring us to the end of this video, all about the best champions you can play for every single role in patch 13.4. We hope you agree with our choices, and let us know who you're having the most success with. Don't forget, before you go, to hit up our website and download our desktop app to get all the builds and runes and everything else you need to know for every single one of these champions, imported straight into your client. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one. Take care.